The United States Navy can put 100,000 tons of diplomatic persuasion anywhere on the planet within a week. 11 supercarriers, each one a floating city with more firepower than most countries' entire air forces. Sounds unstoppable, right? Until you realize that a swarm of missiles costing less than a Honda Civic each could turn a $13 billion aircraft carrier into the world's most expensive artificial reef. Welcome to the nightmare that keeps admirals up at night. So how did the world's most powerful navy end up playing defense against cheap missiles? Keep watching and find out. Let's rewind to 1987. The Persian Gulf. The USS Stark, an Oliver Hazard Perry-class frigate, is on patrol. Standard Tuesday in the Gulf. Except this Tuesday, an Iraqi fighter jet decides to say hello with two Exocet anti-ship missiles. The first one hits. The crew doesn't even see it coming. The second one follows 17 seconds later, punching through the hull like it's made of cardboard. 37 sailors dead. The ship nearly sinks. Here's the kicker though. The Stark had all the fancy toys. Radar systems, defensive weapons, the works. None of it mattered. The missiles were just too fast. And those Exocets. French-made, sure, but old technology even back then. Not exactly cutting-edge stuff. Fast forward to today. Those missiles look like toys compared to what's out there now. And there aren't just two of them anymore. Try 200. All coming at once. That's missile saturation. And it's the ultimate cheat code against the US Navy. The concept is beautifully simple. Overwhelm the defenses with more targets than they can handle. It's like playing whack-a-mole. Except the moles are hypersonic. They're all popping up simultaneously. And if you miss even one, your billion-dollar ship becomes a swimming pool. Think of it this way. You're standing in a batting cage. One ball comes at you, easy. You hit it. 5 balls, tricky, but manageable. Now imagine 50 balls fired at you from different angles at the same time. Good luck with that. That's what the Navy is up against. But here's where it gets really interesting. The US spent decades building the most sophisticated missile defense systems on Earth. The Aegis combat system is basically the iPhone of naval warfare. It can track hundreds of targets simultaneously, prioritize threats and coordinate responses across multiple ships. It's genuinely impressive technology. A single Arleigh Burke-class destroyer packs 90 vertical launch cells. Each cell can hold different types of missiles depending on the mission. Air defense, anti-ship, land attack, you name it. The ship's Sespoy radar can detect a baseball-sized object from over 150 miles away. We're talking about sensors so sensitive, they can probably tell if that baseball is a fastball or a curveball. Sounds pretty solid, right? Here's the problem. Those 90 missiles? That's it. Once they're gone, they're gone. You can't exactly reload at sea. Meanwhile, China's been watching, and learning, and building. The Chinese figured out something crucial. You don't need to build 11 supercarriers to challenge American naval dominance. You just need to build enough missiles to make those carriers think twice about getting too close. It's the ultimate asymmetric warfare strategy. They call it anti-access area denial. Military types love acronyms, so it's a 2/AD for short. Here's how it works in practice. Let's say tensions flare up over Taiwan. The US wants to send a carrier strike group into the region. Show the flag, flex some muscle, the usual playbook. But now that carrier group has to sail through what's essentially a missile shooting gallery that extends about 1,200 miles from the Chinese mainland. And China's not throwing punches one at a time. They've got the DF-21D, affectionately nicknamed the Carrier Killer. It's a ballistic missile specifically designed to hit moving ships at sea. Then there's its bigger brother, the DF-26, which can reach even farther. Guam's not looking so safe anymore. But wait, there's more. China's also got the YJ-18, a cruise missile that flies low over the water, making it harder to detect. The YJ-12, which is supersonic. And they're not keeping these toys to themselves. A single Type 055 destroyer, China's newest and shiniest warship, can carry 112 vertical launch cells. That's more than an American Burke class. Now multiply that across China's rapidly expanding fleet. They're not building one or two of these things. They're building them like they're on a Black Friday sale. The People's Liberation Army Navy now has more ships than the US Navy. Sure, tonnage is a different story. And not all ships are created equal. But numbers matter when you're talking about saturation attacks. Let's talk about what a real saturation attack might look like. It's not pretty. The scenario starts with intelligence. Satellites, reconnaissance aircraft, submarines, all tracking the carrier strike group's position. Not just the carrier, but the escorts too. The cruisers, the supply ships, everything. Then comes the launch. Not from one platform, but from multiple shore-based launchers, fire ballistic missiles in high arcs, ships at sea launch cruise missiles flying low. Submarines add their own missiles to the mix. Maybe even some aircraft join the party from a safer distance. All of it is timed to arrive in the same general window. That's the saturation part. The carrier strike group's Aegis systems light up like Christmas. Threat assessments happen in milliseconds. Which missiles are decoys? Which are the real threats? Which ones are going for the carrier versus the escorts? The computers are working overtime, prioritizing targets, assigning interceptors. The destroyers and cruisers start launching SM-2 and SM-6 missiles. These are the outer layer of defense, trying to knock down threats at range. Each successful intercept is a small victory. But here's the math problem. If you've got 6 destroyers with 90 missiles each, that's 540 interceptors maximum. Sounds like a lot until you realize you're facing 200 incoming missiles. And your intercept rate, even with the best technology in the world, isn't 100%. Some missiles get through the outer layer. Now the fight moves closer. The ships activate their close-in weapon systems, the CIWS, pronounced Sea-Whiz by everyone who doesn't want to sound ridiculous. These are basically R2-D2-looking robots with 20 Gatling guns that fire 4,500 rounds per minute. They're the last line of defense, designed to shred incoming missiles when everything else has failed. But even these have limits. They can only engage one target at a time, and they need a few seconds per target. When multiple missiles are coming in simultaneously from different angles, well, you can see the problem. Let's say the carrier group successfully intercepts 90% of the incoming missiles. That's an incredible success rate. Better than any realistic expectation. That still means 20 missiles get through. A single hit from a modern anti-ship missile can mission kill a destroyer. 2 or 3 hits might sink it. A carrier can take more punishment. Sure, but it's not invincible. And once a carrier's flight deck is damaged, even if the ship stays afloat, it's effectively out of the fight. The really nasty part. This isn't even considering hypersonic missiles yet. Those are a whole different nightmare. Hypersonic missiles travel at Mach 5 or faster. That's over 3,800 miles per hour. At those speeds, the time between detection and impact shrinks to almost nothing. Russia's got the Zircon, which supposedly hits Mach 9. China's testing their own versions. Even if these missiles aren't quite as capable as advertised, and military hardware rarely is, they don't need to be perfect. They just need to be fast enough to compress the defender's reaction time. The physics of intercepting a hypersonic missile are brutal. Your interceptor needs to not just match the speed but predict the trajectory, account for any maneuvering, and actually hit a relatively small target moving faster than anything we've built defenses for. It's like trying to shoot a bullet with another bullet, except the first bullet can dodge. The US Navy knows all this. They're not sitting around hoping the problem solves itself. What do you do about it? Option 1 is more missiles. The Navy's working on this. New vertical launch cells, more capacity, better interceptors. The SM-6 is genuinely impressive, capable of hitting aircraft, missiles, and even surface targets. But it costs about $4 million per shot. Defending against a saturation attack could burn through $500 million in interceptors. And that's assuming you win. Option 2 is directed energy weapons. Lasers. Basically, the Navy's been testing these for years. The appeal is obvious. Lasers travel at the speed of light, have effectively unlimited ammunition as long as you've got power, and the cost per shot is measured in dollars, not millions. The USS Portland successfully tested a laser weapon system that knocked down a drone in 2020. Sounds great, right? Here's the catch. Current laser systems are only effective against smaller, slower threats. Drones, small boats, maybe a subsonic cruise missile if conditions are perfect. They struggle with anything moving really fast or anything with reflective coatings. And they absolutely hate bad weather. Fog, rain, sea spray, all of it degrades the beam. You know, the kind of conditions you often find at sea. Getting a laser powerful enough to take down a hypersonic missile at useful ranges? That's still science fiction. The power requirements alone would strain a ship's electrical systems. Though the Navy's new Zumwalt-class destroyers and the upcoming DDG-X are being designed with this in mind, so there's hope. Option 3 is electronic warfare. Jam the missile's guidance systems. Spoof their radars. Make them think the target is somewhere it isn't. The Navy's pretty good at this. Every modern warship carries sophisticated electronic warfare suites. The problem is modern missiles are getting smarter. They've got multiple guidance modes: GPS, radar, infrared, even AI-assisted targeting. Jam one system, it switches to another. It's an arms race between offense and defense. And right now, offense is winning. Option 4 is the one nobody wants to talk about. Don't be there in the first place. Stay out of range. This sounds cowardly, but it's actually just geography. A carrier's air wing has a certain combat radius. The FA-18 Super Hornet can maybe reach 500 miles from the carrier with a useful weapons load. The newer F-35C extends that somewhat. But if the carrier has to stay 1,500 miles offshore to avoid the threat bubble, suddenly your strike aircraft can't reach their targets. Or they need multiple aerial refuelings, which reduces the sortie rate and puts more aircraft at risk. The Navy's solution? The MQ-25 Stingray, an unmanned aerial refueling tanker. It's designed to extend the range of carrier aircraft by providing gas in the air. Clever. But it's also adding another piece to an increasingly complex puzzle. And those tankers are targets too. There's also been talk about bringing back longer-range strike aircraft. The A-12 Avenger was supposed to fill this role back in the 1990s before it got cancelled. Now there's the F/AXX program, a next-generation fighter that's supposed to have much greater range. But that's years away. And years don't help when the threat is now. Some analysts suggest the Navy needs to think smaller and more distributed. Instead of concentrating power in a few large, expensive, and very sinkable platforms, spread it out. More ships, smaller ships, unmanned ships, make the enemy's targeting problem harder by giving them more targets to track and prioritize. The Navy's actually moving in this direction with the distributed maritime operations concept. The idea is to spread forces across a wider area, making it harder for an adversary to achieve that decisive saturation attack. Instead of one big carrier group, you might have multiple smaller surface action groups, operating semi-independently, but able to combine their firepower when needed. This includes the new Constellation-class frigates being built. Smaller than destroyers, less capable individually, but cheaper and more numerous. Essentially robot warships that can operate with minimal crew or completely autonomous. Pack them with missiles, send them into the danger zone. And if they get sunk, you haven't lost 300 sailors. It's a very different way of thinking about naval power. The carrier has been the center of U.S. naval strategy since World War II. These floating airports project power and presence like nothing else. But maybe the age of the supercarrier is ending. Not because carriers are bad, but because the threat environment has changed. Here's the uncomfortable truth though. All these solutions cost money. Lots of money. The Navy's already stretched thin trying to maintain current readiness while also modernizing for future threats. The Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine program alone is eating up huge chunks of the shipbuilding budget. There's only so much to go around. And while the U.S. is trying to figure out how to defend against missile saturation, potential adversaries are perfecting the attack. China launched more ships last year than the U.S. has in the last decade. Russia's putting hypersonic missiles on everything that floats, with its relatively modest naval capabilities, has enough anti-ship missiles to make any transit through the Strait of Hormuz a very interesting experience. The Persian Gulf is actually a perfect case study. It's narrow, shallow, and surrounded by potential threats. During Operation Praying Mantis in 1988, the U.S. Navy tangled with Iranian forces and came out on top, but that was 1988. Iran's arsenal is significantly more dangerous now. Hundreds of anti-ship cruise missiles, swarming boat tactics, mines, the works. Sending a carrier strike group through the Strait of Hormuz today wouldn't be a show of force. It'd be a calculated risk. This is why you see the Navy increasingly focusing on the Pacific rather than Middle Eastern deployments. The Pacific offers more room to maneuver, deeper water, and frankly, fighting China's Navy is more important than policing the Gulf. Though good luck explaining that to anyone worried about oil prices. The missile saturation problem also changes how conflicts might unfold. In past wars, the Navy could park offshore, launch aircraft, and dominate the battle space. That's how Desert Storm worked. That's how the initial phases of Iraq and Afghanistan went. But try that against a peer competitor, and you might lose a carrier on day one. Suddenly the war looks very different. This creates deterrence problems. If American carriers can't safely operate in contested waters, does the U.S. commitment to defend Taiwan remain credible? What about South Korea, Japan? These are allies that have built their entire defense strategies around the assumption that American naval power can arrive and tip the balance. If that assumption no longer holds, the whole strategic architecture of the Pacific starts to crumble. Some argue this is overblown. The U.S. Navy is still the most powerful maritime force on the planet. No other country can even come close to matching American capabilities across the board. This is absolutely true. But wars aren't fought across the board. They're fought in specific places at specific times. Local Chinese advantages might be enough to offset overall American superiority. It's the classic problem of fighting near someone else's homeland. They have shorter supply lines, more support infrastructure, and they're fighting for something they consider vital. You're expeditionary, operating far from home, with a logistics tail stretching across the Pacific. Geography matters. The solution, if there is one, probably isn't purely technological. It's operational, strategic, and political. Building better defenses helps. Spreading forces out helps. But ultimately, preventing missile saturation attacks means not getting into situations where you're in range of them in the first place. And that requires rethinking how naval power is used in the 21st century. Maybe that means more emphasis on submarines, which are much harder to find and target. The U.S. submarine force remains arguably the most lethal component of the Navy. Quiet, deep, and packed with firepower. Or maybe it means accepting that some areas are simply too dangerous for surface ships and finding other ways to project power. The real nightmare scenario isn't losing a single ship to a saturation attack. It's losing multiple ships, taking thousands of casualties, and having the American public watch it happen in real time on social media. The political consequences of that would be enormous. Suddenly, the cost-benefit calculus of military intervention looks very different when the enemy can credibly threaten to sink your carriers. This is what keeps admirals up at night. Not the tactical problem of intercepting missiles, though that's hard enough. It's the strategic implications of those capabilities. American naval dominance has been a cornerstone of global security for 80 years. It's enabled free trade, protected allies, and deterred aggression. What replaces it? The U.S. Navy isn't going anywhere. It's not suddenly becoming irrelevant. But it is facing the biggest challenge to its supremacy since the end of the Cold War. And unlike Cold War threats, which were largely symmetrical, big Navy versus big Navy, this threat is asymmetric. It's relatively cheap missiles threatening very expensive ships. That's a losing math problem if you can't change the equation. So the Navy is adapting, faster development cycles for new weapons, more experimentation with unmanned systems, better integration of cyber and electronic warfare capabilities, closer cooperation with allies who face the same threats. All of it aimed at solving the missile saturation nightmare. Will it work? That's the billion-dollar question. Or more accurately, the trillion-dollar question given what the Navy costs. The good news is nobody's actually fought a modern naval war between peer competitors with these weapons. Everything is theoretical. The models and war games are alarming, but models aren't reality. The bad news is, if we ever have to find out for real whether these defenses work, it'll be because deterrence failed, and we're in a shooting war with a major power. That's the kind of test nobody wants. So next time you see one of those gorgeous photos of a carrier strike group sailing in formation, looking absolutely invincible, remember there are people in Beijing and Moscow looking at the same photo and doing math. Math about how many missiles it would take to turn that beautiful formation into a very bad day. That's the nightmare. And it's not going away.